This is going to be a sample for how to do the literacy strategies mini lesson. I'm going to kind of walk you through the process of what this would look like. Of course, you're going to have your assignment with the rubric at the bottom, but I also wanted to make sure that you had a sample as well. So notice how you would set up this title slide of your slide deck. You can use PowerPoint, Google Slides, or something else comparable. You've got your title, and notice how the strategy that I'm going to be using as a sample is called the personal dictionary. And so here's my heading right below. The first thing you want to do is explain what the strategy is. And so that's what this slide does, and I'm going to give you an example of how to narrate that. A personal dictionary is something that is student generated. It's a literacy strategy that is completely student-led. It can also be implemented with some teacher guidance. It enables students to self-identify words and terms which are essential to their understanding and performance proficiency. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it can be supplemented with teacher-selected words. So this is where you really have to know your students. Some students are going to be able to self-select those really challenging words in the text that they can identify as being very significant to their successful proficiency, and others are not. It's kind of so overwhelming for them, especially those who are who we consider to be low literacy proficient. They may have trouble actually identifying words themselves. So you have to know your population, and you have to practice this with them. With even high performers, you've got to practice it with them. It allows students to develop their meaning for the words, examples to support the meaning, and connections between words. And so we'll see how we can implement that as we proceed. In this next slide, you need to give some examples of how the literacy strategy could actually be implemented in a classroom. What methods are used. So teachers can allot class time and or assign homework. Teachers can use it for both formative and summative assessments. Students can collaborate formally and informally to compare the meanings of words. And students can use either a standard paper pencil format or technology assisted formats through a variety of technology tools. Those of you who are going to have access to a lot of technology in the classroom, this would probably be a great way to use it. Students could quickly get on a device, and this is something that they could save, whether that be a OneDrive or a Google Doc, or there are lots of tech tools. There's an app called like Word Up, where it basically formats it for them. They put the categories in, and it's really nice, neat way to use it. But and again, the methods have to do with your population. Notice the first one says class time or provide for homework. Again, that depends on your population. It depends on your learners and what their specific context looks like outside of class. Now we want to talk about how to actually integrate the strategy. The best way to implement the personal dictionary literacy strategy is to provide students with a template and a sample. Using a common text, teachers should model how to start a personal dictionary. Then, teachers should have students work in small groups or pairs to identify and define additional words in the common text. Next, the teacher should give the students independent time to self-identify additional words. This process, this slow release of instruction, we often call it we do, y'all do, meaning like a group, and then you do. Is a lot of that slow release of instruction helps students build confidence and understand the expectations. So this process should continue until the personal dictionary is a regular part of the classroom instruction, and then the teacher could use it for either formative or summative assessments, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, I wanted to note up here that notice that in order to make it meaningful, you really need a common text. So this is really not the thing where students used to get like a vocabulary list and they had to go define all those words. They need to actually be working with a meaningful text. So whatever that is in your specific content area, but they need to have a common text that they are looking at, sharing, working on in order to really make the words come alive and for them to be able to have that student-generated meaning. The next slide needs to explain to your classmates how they could potentially assess this work. And when we talk about assessments, I'm going to talk about it in two different ways, formative and summative. But you want to think about short term, how am I going to assess their progress? How can they assess their progress? Because we always want to build in opportunities for students to assess their own progress. And then we also want to look at long term, how could they use this activity? How could I use it to assess their progress? So I'm going to talk about both of those. Formatively, the students could be assessed by, as they're working in pairs, the teacher can monitor and provide feedback, so kind of rotate through the room and listen to the conversations, provide feedback to those small groups. Another way is that if students are working on an independent assignment, so let's say that they're working on something completely unconnected, maybe a project or something, the teacher could ask the students, hey guys, I want y'all to take out your personal dictionaries and let me just see the last few pages of your personal dictionary, the thing that we've been working on the last week. Let them just put it out, and as they're working on that independent assignment, the teacher, pen in hand, or if it's a tech tool, a tech pen in hand or a device in hand, could walk around and actually give written feedback to the students. The teacher could make comments either for correction, like to refine the definition. Maybe a student actually kind of maybe slightly misidentified a term. Maybe the student provided an example that wasn't the best example for the term. And the teacher also, of course, you always want to provide praise. A job well done, something that was done correctly, sufficiently, maybe even a particularly apt example, something like that. And then, of course, eventually this could be done in a class discussion. So the teacher could begin to ask about the meanings of significant words from a common text. The students would be allowed to use their personal dictionaries to participate in that class discussion. So within the class discussion, the teacher would have another layer of formative assessment. As students are talking about different terms and the definitions of terms and the examples that support those definitions, the teacher could actually take that time to maybe make some clarifications or some whole class corrections. So that kind of allows the teacher to monitor the progress of the class. Summatively, this could be assessed as well. The students could actually turn in their personal dictionaries for a grade. So perhaps this could be something that's done, periodically throughout a grading period, and it's a way that students are earning a grade. Of course, if you do this, it needs to have a rubric that the students have in advance so that they would know how they're going to be graded on this on the progress of this particular product. Students could also use their personal dictionaries to take a quiz. And a lot of times people say, well, could I do both of these? Yes, yeah, you absolutely could. You could have the students turn their dictionaries in for a grade, and then you could also have the terms that you use on the quiz come straight from their dictionaries, but maybe not allow them to use it on the quiz. Just tell them, study your personal dictionary. Or you could simply let them have like an open notes, a personal dictionary quiz. So those are just a couple of ways that this particular literacy strategy could be used for assessment. Okay, this next series of slides is where you're actually going to show your classmates the literacy strategy in action using your particular content area. So in order to demonstrate this, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in as if I'm giving this presentation. So here's the scenario and the context. It's an AP music theory course. The grade level is 10 to 12, and there are 12 students in the class who have a wide range of musical talent and knowledge, but are all excited about music. And so some of them are much more musically gifted than others, but they, in a music theory class, you don't just have the ear for it, you also really need to understand the technique and the language of music. And so some of them are talented, but they don't necessarily have the theory to back it up. And vice versa. Some of them perhaps have taken theory, they've had some introductory music classes or some basic band or things like that, but they haven't really had a lot of practice honing those skills. And so it's, again, a very wide range, but they all love music. This was a class that they selected to take. They feel very privileged to get to take this class on their campus. And so it is a large, diverse, urban public high school. So the teacher of this course is also the band director. So he knows many of the students from his performance-based music courses. He knows how challenging that the exam is for this class, and he knows it is important that they start early. So he wants to make the vocabulary instruction more personalized for students. So he's implementing the personal dictionary strategy. He's really trying to, there's so many terms that they have to know before the exam. And he's had some misses in the past on teaching vocabulary. Sometimes it was just kind of boring. And sometimes the students were not actually making the connection to the exam. So he wants to try this particular strategy. Okay, students, today we are going to start our personal dictionaries. So your personal dictionaries will be used for a variety of grades in the class. They're going to be used to help you participate with your peers. They're also going to be used, I'm going to pick them up, and you're going to have a grading rubric. I'm going to give that to you next class period. I just wanted to get you started today. And you'll also be able to use them on your quizzes, your vocabulary quizzes. So it's really important that you take good notes in your personal dictionaries. We're going to get started today. We are looking at, so the common text that we're looking at today is actually going to be a practice test. I know it seems so early to be starting to practice for the exam, but believe it or not, it will be here very soon. And what better way to review the material than to make sure that we actually understand the terms. So this is actually the first sample question. I'm going to kind of go through with you how to set up a personal dictionary and what that looks like. And then you're going to do it with your partner. You're going to do a different one with your partner, and then you're going to have time to do it independently as well. So let's go ahead and get started. In this first question, notice that there are 4 bars of music. The question is at the top, and then the question stem, where the vocabulary term is actually at the bottom. Remember, on this portion of the exam, they will actually play it twice. So you're going to be, you will have to hear the music. You've got to hear it because it's going to be played for you on a recording, and then you're going to answer this question. So in this particular question, one of the terms, the challenging term or the significant term, is called pitch pattern. And I'm going to show you how to set up your personal dictionary for something like this. Don't worry about the answer to this question yet. We're going to go over the answers later. Before you even jump into the answers, you have to really make sure you understand the terms. So we're going to go over the answer. We're going to go over those answers later. So for now, this is how you're going to set up your personal dictionary. This is the format up at the top, and then the bottom, I've given you the sample with pitch pattern. So the first thing you want to do is set your word and your term. Then you want to provide your definition. And some of you may be saying, well, where do I get the definition? Remember, you're going to have that tab on all of your iPads that has the AP glossary. And of course, you can always look something up on Google and we can talk about the definition for it. Of course, you could always try to provide your own definition as well. But that's kind of where I want you to get into this third part, is where you're really personalizing it. So this would be maybe your notes, maybe an example, a strategy, etc. Remember, we're going to begin doing our digital recordings. So a little bit later, for example, you could upload an example of you playing something, if it's telling a particular tempo or something like that. So let's look at this particular pitch pattern, this particular term. So pitch is the quality that allows us to classify a sound as relatively high or low. And remember, that's all. It says relatively because they're dependent on each other, the notes. Pattern is how the pitch is mapped in a bar of music. So what this is meaning when we look at our previous example is, how do the notes, how do the pitch of the notes match what you heard on the tape? Which one is the correct pattern? So your strategy that you could take away from this is, I have to listen closely to the played music and carefully hear. And notice I put it in quotes because we're talking about that inner ear. How the notes proceed from high to low in my head as I read the sheet music. So as you read that bar of music, you've got to pick out the pattern that matches that pitch. Okay, for this next example, I want you to get with your partners. So ones and twos, you know who you are. I want you guys to match up very quickly. With your partner, I want you to use this, the second question from that test, and I want you to together identify a significant term. Then I want you to work with your partner to complete the next term in your personal dictionary. Each one of you is going to have your own entry in your personal dictionary, but you can discuss together. You can look up the terms together if you need to. So take a few moments. Let's take about 5 minutes and we're going to work on that together. Go ahead and turn now. Excellent. As I was going around the room, I heard everyone, you identified the correct term, the term that carries the most meaning. This is what you have to know to get this question correct. And I heard you guys talking about some really excellent definitions to match it. So I borrowed one of your definitions. You guys did a great job, Group A. So this is what they put, and this was their strategy. So this was the term rhythm pattern, the pattern of musical movement through time. That's what rhythm is. And this is a special kind of pattern. Rhythm is a special kind of pattern. It's formed by a series of notes differing in duration and stress. So remember, once again, on the exam, you're going to listen 2 times to a recording, and then you've got to look at those bars of music, and you've got to hear, again with your inner ear, how long each note lasts and compare it to those samples. All right, now you are ready for independent practice. So I have put questions, I want you to look at questions 3 through 5. And independently, I want you to identify 3 terms, just 3, that you think are significant. I want you to add them to your personal dictionary, and I want you to complete an entry for them. When everyone is finished with this activity, you're going to actually share your entries with your partners before we use them in a class discussion and then a demonstration. That's where we're going to actually discuss the meanings of a lot of these words, and there are a lot in here. There are a lot of words in this particular chunk that you could choose from. And we're going to refine our understanding of them, and then we're actually going to talk about the correct answers of these. So go ahead and get started. Okay, and this slide is kind of a summation slide of the personal dictionary. And so I'm going to jump in and give you a sample of how to set that one up. Students could pick many words in that last set, but it is important that the teacher use this opportunity to help them navigate text, selecting significant words and refining their understanding of those words. As the students work, the teacher should move around the room to monitor entries. This will allow the teacher to know which terms to cover in the discussion or in future lessons. Additionally, as students share their entries with partners, the teacher may also use that time for formative assessment and feedback. The teacher can also use some of the questions and comments that students make in the partner share to direct the whole class discussion. Finally, students would use their personal dictionaries to participate in a class discussion about the meaning of these terms. Additionally, the teacher can review the meanings of each term and review the correct answers to each question with the students. So you're kind of building in both test prep and vocabulary review. And of course, we know those go hand in hand. As the class discussion progresses, students may add more terms to their personal dictionaries. Eventually, they could use their personal dictionaries to take a vocabulary quiz. And so in the scenario that we presented, this slide is going to help classmates know how the integration would actually take place in this part of the lesson. You want to put a closure slide. Just like a concluding paragraph, you want to put some type of concluding slide that allows you to reflect on the high points of the literacy strategy. Personal dictionaries allow students to learn vocabulary in a personalized way by constructing their own meaning. They can be used in combination with small group work, independent work, and class discussion. They can be used for both formative and summative assessment. And personal dictionaries provide an easy and useful way for teachers to embed content-specific vocabulary lessons into everyday practice. All right, here are some reminders for your mini lesson. So the presenter must upload to Moodle your narrated presentation by the due date. And you're using that sign-up sheet. That is your due date that you have to, whatever week that you have said you're going to do it, you need to do it by that week. If you are online, then you have until Monday night to upload it, the end of the week. And if you are an in-person student, you need to do it by Tuesday, which will be our in-person class. And because you're going to present it to us, to the class. Classmates must view and comment on each presentation, provide feedback about overall usefulness, something you learned, how you can use the strategy in your own content area, how it can be adapted, a positive feature of the presentation, etc. So our feedback, we want it to be uplifting, we want it to be positive, and we also want it to be insightful and thoughtful. The presenter has 1 week to upload a 1 to 2 page reflection, which incorporates a self-evaluation of domain 3 of the fee. And I'm going to explain that in the coming slides. All right, so you have uploaded your presentation to Moodle by your due date, by the week that you were supposed to do it. If it's an in-person, you have to do it before we come to class on the in-person date that we all meet. If it's online, you've got that whole week to do it. And then your peers are going to go on and they're going to make their comments, okay? And they need to do that as soon as possible so that you can get your feedback. And then you're going to look at their comments, you're going to reflect on the process itself, and then you're going to write a 1 to 2 page reflection of the exercise. You need to use APA formatting. You need to explain the decision making that inspired and informed the lesson's design. And so when I'm saying that, I'm thinking about what about your content drove your decision to use that literacy strategy a particular way? What about the students that perhaps you plan to teach drove the decision for you to modify it in that way, or to implement that strategy in that way. Your reflection also needs to justify the fee self-evaluation. Remember, only looking at domain 3. You don't have to turn in a rubric or anything for that, but you need to incorporate that domain into your reflection. Some people actually do like to use they like to copy and paste the fee into their reflection, and you can do that as well, but you just have to make sure that you also support it with evidence from the lesson somewhere within your narrative, your discussion. You need to discuss the lesson's strengths and weaknesses. So something that you wish you would have done perhaps is a weakness, and so a lot of times it's when you read the comment, you're like, oh, I should have done that. I should have adapted it that way. Sometimes you wish that you knew other ways to do it. The strengths, so something that you're kind of proud of, maybe the overall design or the way that you were able to match it with a particular text in your content, etc. And then lastly, explains how the student will implement the literacy strategy in the future. So this means, how will you implement this literacy strategy in the future? So no matter what your content area is, some of you have very what we consider traditional text-heavy content, and some of you don't. But all of the strategies can actually be used within your subject, within your domain. And I hope that this example of music can show you how adaptable these are. All right, so when we're talking about the fee and we're only looking at domain 3 is instruction. It's the longest one on the fee, and it often is kind of the most difficult, honestly. It can be very challenging. So if we look over here in the left-hand side, this is where you're going to see the different categories on each row. And then as we move across, you're going to see what it takes to get a 3 or to get a 4 in each category. And so what we always tell our students is, at this time, we would love for you to be shooting to that 3 level. And when you teach your own lesson in the field, you're going to be shooting for that 3 level. So just keep that in mind. The quality of questions, the discussion techniques, and the student participation. So for example, when I look at discussion techniques here, and I can go all the way across, in that lesson that I just presented, the little mock lesson, the sample lesson, a 3 says that the teacher created a genuine discussion among students, stepping aside when appropriate. Although we didn't get to see that in the lesson, because obviously it wasn't a real lesson, you have to ask yourself, did the lesson lead to what would have truly been a discussion? Yes, it did. And we actually, we saw how there was careful scaffolding for that. There was a partner project before there was going to be a whole class discussion. And so it was, that would have led to a good class discussion. And so that's some pretty good, we're headed in the right direction. If we look at a 4, it says the students assume considerable responsibility for the success of the discussion, initiating topics and making unsolicited contributions. We can assume that the literacy strategies mini lesson, the personal dictionary, would have actually led to this, because the students were self-selecting their terms. So they were really driving the content here. It would have been great to actually see this in a class, because it probably would have been really useful. Let me give you a little hint here. Anything that you use for this mini lesson, you may want to use in your actual lesson plan that you write for this class. And remember, that lesson plan is actually going to be delivered in the field. So you could let all of these things work together, and you could really streamline this process for yourself. So as you are reflecting on your progress and you write your reflection, this is what you want to use, domain 3, okay? All right, I'm going to show you a little bit more. So this is the next part of domain 3. The next component, or again on the left, notice structure and pacing. So let's look at what it says for the 3. The lesson has a clearly defined structure around which the activities are organized. Pacing of the lesson is generally appropriate. If that would have been a real lesson, this would have been at least a 3 level. Possibly even a 4, maybe, but definitely a 3 level. There was a very careful structure, a recognized research-based structure of the slow delivery, the slow release of instruction. So that's a good sign. We also know when we talk about grouping of students, so the instructional groups are productive and fully appropriate to the students or the instructional purposes of the lesson. So by having them work in partners as a grouping, notice I was saying 1s and 2s, that had been something that should have been set up already so that the students could easily transition to that. So this would have been looking pretty good too. And so what I'm trying to get you to see here is that the literacy strategies are actually such an effective method of teaching that you're always going to do well on an evaluation on the fee. With a few tweaks, you're going to do really well. All right, and this is the last slide. This is the last part of Domain 3. It's component 3.3. This one actually has to do with assessment. And so this one has to do with monitoring of student learning. So remember, I built in some checks there to monitor for some formative assessment, some diagnostic prompts to elicit information. So that could be one. I built in a way to give feedback to students. I was going to go around to each group and do that. There was an opportunity for independent. This part where it says student self-assessment and monitoring of progress, that's an area that probably would have needed to be refined. That is where maybe perhaps I could have given them a rubric in advance or like a little checklist so that they would know that they were on track. However, I did give them the sample. So that does help. I worked the first one for them and kind of gave them a sample. And I also built in checks for them to check with a partner and compare their answers. So there was some. They did have an opportunity to assess and monitor the quality of their work against an assessment criteria and performance standards. So there was the opportunity there. So this is what I'm just kind of having this conversation with myself. That's what you're going to do. So when you finish with your lesson, or even before, if you want to see how it would rate on the fee, you want to kind of go through this part of the fee, just Domain 3, and you want to see how could I have scored on this had it led to a real lesson. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is to get you to see how literacy strategies are good teaching methods. They are effective and they do lead to effective outcomes for your students and of course for yourself on these evaluation tools. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out as you sign up and design your literacy strategies mini lessons. Have a great week.